Welcome to Bespoken Bones with your host, Pavini Moray, connecting ancestors, sex, magic, and science. Pavini explores transpersonal tools for erotic wellness every new and full moon, engaging educators, healers, spiritual leaders, and scientists in revolutionary dialogue. Get ready to feel good and go deep. This is Bespoken Bones.
Welcome to Bespoken Bones, ancestors at the crossroads of sex, magic, and science. We're in the business of healing trauma, connecting with our roots, and developing radiant erotic wellness in past, present, and future generations. And I'm your host, Pavini Moray, and it's my pleasure to welcome Mars Gradiva. Mars is a professional enthusiast and an interstellar traveler. Mars Gradiva is also a queer trans astrologer, idea vessel, and ancient interstellar traveler, and a professional enthusiast making queer liberatory astrology. Mars enjoys music, body, and plants, and has a podcast series called The Future that provides the opportunity for folks to join the conversation, shaping archetypes by making astrology accessible, and discover the Zodiac as political language liberation. And I highly encourage you to check out more about Mars at marszachgradiva.com. I'm going to spell it for you. It's MarsZachgradiva.com. Mars, welcome.
Thank you.
So glad to have you here on Bespoken Bones. And I just want to start with talking with you about your ancestors and how you know them and how you relate with them.
Wow, that one feels like a really big question for me. And one that I guess kind of fundamentally comes to something that I've reflected on a lot when I've listened to your show and other people talk about ancestors in the world before, about and something that reflects in my work as discovering these deeper meanings inside of archetypes is different types of ancestry. Because when you ask me that question, actually quite directly, I almost feel like a little bit having a feeling of shyness, of wanting to protect something that feels sacred, because I feel old, very, very old, in a way that has always felt very present in my life. And I know that a lot of this time that people ask these questions are asking of who is your, who are the people who gave birth to you? And those people, they're settlers with some general lost history, mystery for a large part of that ancestry as well. But when you ask me that question, my heart first goes to the presence of feeling with memory, the memory of the people I have known with my soul. And that feels older and different than a relationship to the kind of memory of the people whose actions gave me this body, and close in different ways, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying, and actually relates to something in my own cosmology around soul groups, right? Of incarnating with souls in groupings on repeat. And that there's in several different traditions that I'm aware of, longstanding traditions. And I know in Hinduism, this is a thing of the kaula of that the soul groups are that there is like this memory, this old recognition, and it's not necessarily your biological family. It could be, but it's not necessarily, right? That there are these groups of souls that incarnate together to serve some mystery or some purpose that's not necessarily known in the human form, right? But there's a greater form, and yeah, that's what comes up for me when I hear you talk about it. Of like that, there's so many different kinds of ways that we relate to our ancestors based on, what's in our bodies. Yeah,
totally. And when you were saying that, I was thinking about, I can't remember who told me this or like who passed this visualization onto me, but like a grouping of grapes, like whenever that idea comes to my mind, I always think of someone relating it to that, like, maybe these people at another time who I guess incarnated with to know again and again in all these different ways. And you perhaps as well, if this is how you see it, like I could laugh and be like, maybe one time we were just a grouping of grapes. That would be a great way to hang out. I would love that.
Oh my God. I'm sure you've seen Sense8, right?
Oh yeah. I've seen a little bit of
Kind
that.
of like, like that. What is it? And it makes sense that we would feel protective, right? Because if that is indeed what's going on, and if there's some greater mystery that this bunch of grapes is in service to, like, we got to protect our grapes,
Yeah.
Like, it's not going to work if one of us gets squished, right?
Well, at least it'd be very sad. Hopefully they get eaten, That'd be like a great, well, like, the best ending for a grape is to feed someone.
Yeah. Lovely. Well, I know that seemed like a really big question, but we're going to dive into an even bigger one right now.
Yeah.
You know what's coming, right?
I guess so.
About the meaning of life.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I mean, when I filled out that form, I was like, I have all these big ideas, and I guess they really all, I just, like being in isolation right now, I'm like, and having a lot of Sagittarius in my chart, I'm just really thinking about the big picture all the time. But it's funny, I wrote like a little thing of things I'd kind of might want to talk about. And the meaning of life actually kind of starts at the beginning. So this is a wonderful question to ask. Like, well, the thing that I'd kind of been thinking about and wanted to share with you and actually in direct response and appreciation of your work and having like sharing this opportunity for people to think about ancestors, thinking about the meaning of life, I was thinking about like, like water is life. And I work with the Zodiac in a very visual way. And I'm a very visual thinker. So to kind of like follow the pattern of the Zodiac, starting with like if water is life, then thinking about the sign of water of Cancer. And it has to do with like our relationship to the moon and the ocean. And the ocean being like the first, well, we're all part of the ocean, right? Like all of the plants and animals and the ability for life to inhabit this world comes from the ocean. If you look really long enough ago into the earth, it was just all ocean. There wasn't even any land masses. And seeing that ocean or water itself as a like fundamental element of how life happens and incarnates, of like consciousness itself on this planet, and thinking about how that experience of life, and people commonly relate this archetype to memory, like life being memory. What does that mean for this really intense experience that we're all going through right now? Like, what is the memory that is being touched and like manifesting into this moment of total intense and almost surreal experience of change and like consequence, but it still feels very sudden. When I think about this thing about like water is life and this archetype of water, Cancer, has to do with the moon. So we put those two together. There's like the moon is in this like constant and chaotic rhythmic embrace with the earth and with this water, and it's churning around like all of these moon cycles. We can look at the moon and it seems very steady, but the way that that familiar motion of the moon in the long term is this like giving of change. Whenever I think about that, I think about this poem from Octavia Butler in Parable of the Sower. And I feel like it appropriate every time to like say this poem, to say like, to quote a prophet, because it feels honorable to acknowledge that in art forms. The poem goes, everything you touch, you change. Everything you change changes you. The only lasting truth is change. God is change. And I think that poem seems like the center of this archetype of Cancer, or the relationship between the water and the moon, or life itself. Like our whole experience of life is being in this like constant experience of change. And all of the connections that we make with other people is this experience of like giving one another opportunities to change. Like every time we like share words or a conversation, like you change inside as you listen to the words, and I change just by speaking. And likewise in return, like every touch. Yeah. And that the thing that where I brought up we were talking about the grapes, right? And getting to know people like over time. That's like a form of memory. Feels most appropriate to say, like having familiarity. Like, I don't know. I've had an experience where I like met someone for the first time, and the first time I met them, I was like, are you like, do you look exactly like my sister? But they don't actually. There's some similarities.
Mm.
But that person who I like grew up with, shared a room with for many, many years as children, and whose face is so familiar in that deep way of like imprinting very early on and spending, decades together. When I first meet this other person, there's the same feeling of familiarity, but I know our bodies have never interacted. It's like this feeling of memory coming up when we meet other people. And when I look in the zodiac, the sign that's most related to sex of Scorpio, it's kind of like that feeling of the grapes. It's like that kind of ancestry. Where like, Scorpio is like Pluto. So the best way I think to understand these archetypes is to see them in their body, I guess, which is the planet. Pluto is like, even I just say only Pluto, and we're thinking about something that's much, the planet and how it functions is very different from having just one name, because Pluto is actually two small planets, and one is smaller than the other. There's Pluto and Chiron. So Pluto is the name of the god of the underworld, and then Chiron is like person who ferries souls to the underworld. So there's
Right.
these two planets that are have this relationship to coming in and out of the other world. And they're spinning around one another. It's not like the moon where Earth is like the center of the gravitational relationship, and then the moon moves around the Earth. But Pluto and Chiron, they're like locked face to face, and the center of their gravity, that unseen space, is in between them. And they're spinning face to face, and they're tidally locked, which means they're always showing each other the same face, like locked, holding on to one another and spinning and going on this long journey around the solar system where they spend a lot of their time very far out, where this giant ring of ice around the solar system. And so they're frozen in one particular form, locked face to face for a long period of time. And then for a short burst, 20 years of their journey, one journey around the sun, they get a little bit closer to the sun than Neptune, which is the farthest of the major planets out. And then their whole icy surfaces melt. They're covered in water. They go from frozen into a form for like hundreds of years, locked face to face. And then they go through this experience of like melting at the same time together. And their gravitational dance together is moving around that water. And they go through this experience of change together. And then they dive back into this experience of being frozen again as they continue on their journey, but they're frozen in an entirely new form.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I mean, what's coming up as I'm listening to this? I mean, it's poetic and also I work with a lot of couples in my practice.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh, right. I know this dance.
Mm-hmm.
This is the dance of intimacy.
Yes. Yeah.
I will only be this one way with you for a really long time until we both go through something really intense, and then we're going to be different with each other, right?
Yeah. Wow. That's exactly it. And I mean, this language, it's, as above, so below. I think there's like a reason why we like have this. We're like speaking about the same kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
That those like these larger forces, like we use them for language in astrology because they like reflect our personal experiences in these ways that are so defined. And it's true because like what you're bringing up about couples therapy, like that's like experience of like if Scorpio and Pluto is related to sex, like that's what it's like to have a sexual relationship with someone, or even just a singular sexual exchange, like this like merging of energy that happens when we give ourselves our like experience to feel another person and give that to this other person, like feeling such deep empathy that, where do I begin and where do you begin? Those lines of consciousness start to blur.
Mm-hmm.
And then we go through this like intense experience of change through those moments that we're sharing with people. But the thing I want to bring out Scorpio to its like both larger and smaller at the same time. I find that thinking works good for me that way. Because if Scorpio's water, right, I talked about Cancer earlier, Cancer being like the consciousness of water, the ocean itself. And Scorpio is another water sign. So what other part of water? I talked about being like almost like fixed in an experience of transformation. So that would be for Scorpio, like water can freeze. We can have this like frozen relationship to the psychic world or emotional world or connection. Or it can be liquid and fluid and moving and kind of like lost from body almost, like being able to feel so many other things. Or it's like clouds or mist or steam. It's like constantly in this experience of change. And our like physical relationship to that is like we drink water. When I think about like water and ancestry, like I have a cup of water beside me right now, and I'm like looking at it like I know that I'm going to drink that water. Who else has drank that water
Mhm.
in the
Yeah,
past?
I absolutely resonate with that. I think about that a lot as a way to connect with my ancestors. Who else has bathed in this water? Who else has drunk this water? Who else has pissed this water out?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And actually,
My ancestors did, right? Like my people drank
y-
the same water that I'm drinking. It's so
yes.
cool.
Yeah. And animals too, you know, and like every living thing has
Yeah.
drunk this water because it's all the same water from back from the ocean, right? It hasn't really changed. It's all the same water. That's the part that really starts to trip me out when I start going down there. Like, then that feeling of ancestry feels like really old because then what if that those people that you've met in this lifetime who you're like, I know you, I know you right off the bat. Like, what if you actually were just a bunch of grapes or like a family? Just you were like hatched as snakes together once, you know, like those that feeling of memory it only really makes sense to me to be that old because we've been drinking all this same water for like several billion years. Life has been. So it just feels so old.
I particularly enjoy when we get back beyond the human ancestors.
Hmm.
Like when in ritual or trance work of like transcending the human and getting to the other than human. And I was interviewing Simon Tukur a while ago, who's I can't remember how he describes his work, but it's like somatics and evolution
Hmm.
basically, and like anthropology in the body of, you know, like how we hold all of the forms of evolved life
Hmm.
in our current bodies, and how like movement is a way to, you know, to access all of these different forms of evolution and memory and history. Like it's
Hmm.
all right. It's not outside of us, it's inside of us. Like the whole
Hmm.
timeline of life, right, is inside of us, like because we
Hmm.
traveled it, and are just the like the ones right now who are experiencing it. And yeah, I also think of water as life, and I think about the like how it connects every living being on this planet is dependent on water, and connected through it, and revealed itself to me in a moment as like, oh, this is the planetary nervous system. This is how we
Hmm.
regulate, is through this. It's not blood. It's not circulation. I mean, maybe it's that too, but it's the nervous system of the planet
Hmm.
is our water. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I love that you were kind of saying those two things together about like movement of the body and water as the um like nervous system of the planet because like in the zodiac, Capricorn is like the mirror opposite of Cancer, so like part of one another. And Capricorn is like it's like the reality of the body. It's like memory and time kind of putting together. Memory over time creates a body, like basically like our DNA, which is like a physical structure that people can, if you get a big enough microscope, can look at. It's just a collection of memories, right? And then, but that creates this like current physical body that's meant to be in motion. And that, but this archetype of Capricorn is, it's like it's like consequences, like the archetype of consequences. So all of the ways that we connect over time and how we respect life essentially creates the physical bodies that we are living in. That is like the consequence of our experience. So when I think about Capricorn, I see that like our physical ancestors. Well, so those people who like they're eating and drinking water and peeing and defecating and living lives together, how they interacted with their environment, how they created society and culture and language and structures of how to interact with our environment, is our bodies are the consequences of all of those things. And which feels heavy to talk about in this moment where there's like so much on the line. Our like interaction with water feels like it's played such a large role in bringing us to the brink right now. Like all of our physical bodies are like, oh no, the consequences of capitalism have brought us to the brink. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a pretty big crush on Rachel Pollak, who's a tarot elder, queer elder of tarot, and I was reading her book this week for I read it every day, seriously. That let's just be real. And I was reading about the Justice card, and she's saying exactly what you're saying, right? And which I think is what many of my teachers say, that we become what we practice. We are the choices we make. We are made of the actions we take. Like those, there's nothing without consequence, right? And this idea that we can somehow act with impunity, right? Like we can, to quote Lou Reed, dump battery acid in a stream and just think like, oh, that's fine. Like that doesn't have impact on me. Right.
Yeah.
And like, just like, I finally realized like, oh man, I'm at a point in my own liberation or my own healing where like, I don't believe that that's true anymore. You know, of like, I actually think that there's something, I guess it's integrity, but that's not quite it. It's like alignment of action and what's important, like what my values are, that like it's like it doesn't work for it to be out of alignment at all anymore, right? Because like I believe that so strongly that would become what we practice, right? And I hear that you're saying that it's a heavy moment to talk about it, but I'm like, oh yeah, it's a fucking great moment to talk about this. Like, let's talk about it, you know, like, yes, you know, like, yes, like that's right. Our bodies are all made by capitalism. It is completely true. And there's something inside our bodies that don't want to admit that and don't want to let go of that. Right.
But our
don't want to let go of that truth.
That's true. I feel like, yeah, our relationship to like acknowledging truth feels like a very central part of all of it. Because we're talking about like, it's the truth that millions of bodies, billions, trillions, uncountable numbers of bodies have drank the water that is sitting in my cup right now. That's a truth. But then
that has also made Kool-Aid at some point.
Totally.
Right?
Yes. But then
Just
it's
to take it
also,
there.
I mean, you gotta love Kool-Aid. You gotta love the snacks. It's a really fun part of incarnating the snacks. Yeah, but it's also true that all of these consequences of how we're interacting with our environment is like our physical thing. I mean, I've been personally like kind of obsessing astrologically over this moment for a couple of years. There's like a significant transit which is happening right now, and we're kind of experiencing the first little bit of the consequences of this transit. So funny enough, the two planets that I was talking about with Pluto and Saturn, so like Pluto being Scorpio and like our like karmic ancestry, and then Capricorn being and Saturn being like our physical ancestry. So those two planets on January 6th and 7th ish conjuncted in Capricorn at 21 degrees, 22 degrees. Anyways, there. And so we're talking about like Saturn being like physical consequences. Saturn is like everything from like, it's like your teeth and your bones, but it's also like the state, like we have built all of these institutions over time through how we interact with one another as a society that have brought us all of these consequences. Like, I feel like capitalism can really be a part of that archetype of Capricorn. It's just about like how to distribute resources, Saturn, like, or management of resources. How do you manage the resources in your own body and how we collectively do it together? And then over time, we have these consequences of, it does feel scary to think that, wow, we really need to not drive cars with gas anymore. But the idea of being like, but I don't know how to live any other way because this is all my body knows how to do is also the truth. They're like part of one another.
And I love it, right? And I love driving my car.
Yeah, it's fun. Cars are fun, undeniable, but they're like choking us at the same time.
Right.
Yeah. And then, so Pluto and Saturn, like Pluto is like the underworld and like death and like dark transformation, like, like going to that place of, when talking about that Pluto as a planet, it's like going far off into the underworld away from consciousness for a really long time. And then coming back and then having these like incredibly ecstatic moments of like melting and all this change. And then they're freezing back into another thing and going around. It's kind of like, it's a great metaphor for, or visualization of like reincarnation, like spending a long time in the underworld and coming back, having these experiences of transformation. But it's our relationship to, to death and how we interact with death and all those consequences of how we have sexual relationships with one another and how we interact with sexual respect. Those consequences coming for these intense moments, they're dormant for a long time, and then these intense moments of transformation and change. So put those two together, those two energies, Pluto and Saturn, the like consequences of everything we've been doing, hitting like, it's time to burn to the ground. Because that's how Pluto works. Everything must dissolve first before there's room for new growth. Death is only an experience of transformation. Like when you drink water and you pee it out, you're making fertilizer, essentially. That's the same thing when you eat food and you poop it out, you've made fertilizer, essentially. That's how we like have fertilized, not with human excrement, obviously, but we fertilize gardens with manure. Mm. And so that experience of something that is dying in order to give us life as we eat it, we are interacting with it by gaining life as we digest it, and then we give it back to the environment in a form that is usable to give life to another being. Well, the way that our society interacts with death is brutal.
You know how they've I don't know if you got taught this in elementary school, the food pyramid,
mm-hmm.
like what you're supposed to eat and what are the right things, and that it's my understanding that kind of current nutritional theory reveals the food pyramid for what it is, which was a lobby effect on
mm-hmm.
Washington, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's also true, that like how we believe about, or how we've been taught to believe about something like the food chain, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of like humans at the top of the food chain without predator.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's like this tiny, 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 tiny little, like what viruses are just, proteins, right? Tiny protein strands. And that like, is that not a predator for humans, right? And
yeah,
totally a predator for humans. And it's like, what would happen if we just got out of this freaking mindset of being at the top of the food chain? right? Of like, what if we got a little bit more humble, and what if we crawled on our knees towards the water and we're just like, oh yeah, right. I remember when I had to heave myself up out of here, right?
Yeah.
And like face the crisis of like learning to breathe.
Yes.
Oxygen with lungs that are on land instead of gills. Like, what if, this reframe of who we think we are and the place that we think as a species we hold in this world. I mean, my sense of is that we're wrong. I'm not sure. I
Oh,
can't quite
definitely.
see through the illusion to what's actually true because I'm very indoctrinated, but it's just my sense that we're wrong about it. And like, what if we just saw it in a different way? Of
Yeah.
our actual, like, and I'm curious if there's anything astrologically that helps us get humble.
Oh yeah. I could definitely I've been thinking about that. Definitely. It's really everything we've just been talking about, like that we're all related and we're all essentially kind of part of the same being. If water is life, and we're like mostly made of water, like everything that's living is, like, then we're all kind of part of the same being. There's like, it's hard to hold one logically without understanding this other component part of it. But this opportunity of change is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to see that interacting with the world, like there's possibility to have ownership over it. And that's what that food pyramid, or man being at the top of the food chain, that mindset suggests to me of a relationship of ownership. And what is the kind of like deepest relationship of ownership that a human could have? Coming from the idea that it's like actually impossible to own anything. It's just like a emotional relationship, or like a social agreement or arrangement that one person or a group of people have, like kind of like exclusive use of a certain thing or idea or person. I think that's like, because I don't think that humans have always been like this. Like treating the world with little respect, and seeing ownership. Like when I look into the zodiac and into the world, like humans have spent, like we've been around for 300,000 years in our genetic sameness. Like if we've been around for this long, then we obviously have extensive history. And there are many peoples in the world, even now, who have intimate relationship with respecting life and respecting the earth. We have this knowledge inside of us, and I think we're really good at it. But we have this like notion of ownership. And I think the notion of ownership comes from ownership of children. Having this, because we talk about ancestors and we're talking about like sex as well. And children are an essential part of that experience. They like come from our like, channeling someone into the womb and having an intimate sexual relationship, as it can happen in lots and lots of different queer ways. There's still this sexuality also has this deep relationship to reproduction, and this like, like bringing forth of a new life into the world. How we have like our relationship to our children, like, are they their own beings? Do we see them as like ancestors incarnate? Like, if we see the world as we can reincarnate, then that means that these children are ancestors who have come back to experience this life with us. They want to do another grape cluster, and this time they want to be the kid, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But to have a relationship of ownership with a child, I'm dancing around just saying like colonial patriarchy, to be
Yeah.
totally honest. What is colonial patriarchy and a relationship to, but in its fundamental need to own a child, to say, this child is mine and I am going to imprint my patrilineal legacy, saying, this is mine and I will teach them to walk like me and to speak like me and to count time like me. And I am the one who decides. They carry my name into their life. That relationship of ownership requires a few things. It requires monogamy, enforced monogamy. So we look at it like, because patriarchy and patrilineage, establishing patrilineage is way older than DNA tests. So to do that without like this like scientific confirmation of genetic relationship requires monogamy. So a person who has a womb only has sex with a person who bears seed. And only those two people can have sex. The time period that the child is happening or conception is supposed to be happening, then that means that that child is for sure came from this one particular seed bearer. And there's lots of very practical reasons to know how to do that practice outside of enforced monogamy and colonial patriarchy. But to have like a colonial patriarchal society where every man or person who is a seed bearer, who is, you have to fulfill this role of man, this is your only way to relate to the society, has to have this like relation. We think about kind of like control of reproduction and like ownership of women's bodies. But I feel like that part is almost like the roundabout, the way to get to owning children. To be like, one seed bearer can only have sex, or the womb bearer has to experience monogamy, essentially, more so than a person who's giving seed in a colonial patriarchal society. And but that is that feels like what are the consequences that are coming to bear here, but to enforce that throughout an entire society, because as we and probably all the queer people out there, and probably most people deepest in their souls, understand that like monogamy for all, cis hetero for all, doesn't work. It feels like it does not even really work for like most or all people in the cis het world. Like, it's a really strict script that seems like it's really painful for everyone. So in order to enact a world where everyone has to relate, like engage in enforced monogamy for the strict establishment patrilineage, involves rape, essentially. That's like no way around it. And so we're thinking about, like our karmic relationship to sex. And when I think about our karmic relationship to sex and our relationship to rape or sexual assault, when I'm thinking about in the zodiac, I'm thinking about Pluto and Scorpio, because there's something about that archetype that's also kind of ruthless.
Mm-hmm.
And
I'm curious what you would say about that, because there's I'm just thinking of like in my work, like the rapey parts, that we experience, no matter what our gender is, just like those are the parts that we disallow, if we've been socialized, quote unquote, correctly, right? There's ways that we create identity around not being rapey, like, I'm not one of those kinds of people who does that kind of thing. And yet, like, all of the planets get to belong to the solar system, right? And it just seems like the more we try to excise the rapey bits, the more shadowy and powerful they actually become, right? And it's like, what is it like as, yeah, what is just like to turn towards that and be like, yeah, I sometimes feel that desire for power inside of me, for unethical use of power. I choose to not do that, but like I don't want to excise that part. I don't want to deny that desire. I actually want to turn towards it and bring it closer um and have more dialogue with it, right? So that it's not so like operating in the background, right?
Mm-hmm.
And powerful. And I just wonder if like how would you, from that astrological perspective of course, wanting to deconstruct rape culture, like how do we embrace Pluto and Saturn? How do we turn towards the bits that are power over in ourselves? And I mean, we can definitely, like, white people screaming at white people to stop being racist, right? Like we definitely know how to tell each other not to do it. But like what did the planets teach us about turning towards that in ourselves and with compassion and embracing and also choice about our actions?
Yeah, the first thing that or my mind went was to like the goddess of the sacred flame, that kind of idea of like goddess of hearth and home, which is also a story that's told kind of in astrology too, but it's a general mythological story or relationship to collective need for sexual healing. So, pretty common practice throughout the world over time of like a group of or a community to have a collective fire that's always going. And so, like, if you're in your own home, you can, and you need to light the fire, you can just like go, like, light a stick on this fire and bring it into your own home. And so in order to have that collective fire, it involves this like collective work to build the fire, to keep it going, to keep it watched over, very particularly to have people, yeah, there to watch over the fire. And in some, you definitely heard of this practice in relationship to Vesta, goddess and hearth and home, where stories of the people who would be there, you know, watching over this collective sacred flame, also doing another job of watching over a collective sacred flame. People who would go and watch over the fire would also be offering sexual healing to people in their community. So like kind of our like original relationship or oldest relationship to sex work. And it's funny, I can't remember exactly what you said when you were saying that, but like something that you said made me think of like our kind of current cultural relationship to sex work. And it's so like, hidden behind, like we don't acknowledge it. But from my own experience of doing sex work, whether I guess formally or informally, so much of it is just can be really about like sexual healing. And we need sexual healing because everyone's experience of sexuality is a process of carrying that sacred flame, whether you're with the communal fire or not. That's the whole point of the communal fires, sometimes to leave and light different homes or to connect communities together. But you carry part of that sacred flame, and so you also need tending. So if we carry this like ancestral relationship to sexuality, we all have this like divine need also to tend to that part of our experience. And for like a need of power, what power greater can there be other than vulnerability? That seems like you asked me starting in the beginning the meaning of life. When I think about that archetype of cancer or water and memory, meaning of life, it's really about like connection at its rawest, most raw possible manifestation of connection being totally and utterly changed by the experience of another person. And that is extreme vulnerability. But in order to do that, that takes incredible, incredible bravery. to be vulnerable. And I feel like a lot of our need for power is to act out our need to experience vulnerability. Because where in this world of capitalism can we experience vulnerability? Any person, even from, we can talk about marginalized people or people who experience the boot end of capitalism or colonialism and all of these different forms of violence. And of course, they're getting this ability to experience vulnerability taken away by if you don't have housing, if you don't have access to food, you don't have access to your culture or your people or being able to your own land or speak your own language. Like, how can you experience the vulnerability of showing your true self in order to connect with another person? And at the same time, white supremacist, colonial patriarchy, capitalism, people who are on the top of that pyramid in order to get the benefits of taking away from all of these other people. What vulnerability can they experience? Like, it's like, from my own experience of doing sex work with a lot of those people, like, there is this like massive culture of this fear of experiencing penetration, but like, there's a G spot there. Wouldn't you want to experience penetration? Not saying that everyone has to do that, but on a cultural sense, in like this larger sense, telling people who are men or who have, seed bearing bodies that they cannot experience that form of vulnerability. Like, the whole system is built for no one to experience vulnerability. And the system that fills us with this need to experience power at any form, because we never get access to this real power, the real power of feeling your own feelings and feeling another person's feelings, feeling incredible empathy, other person's emotional inner world. When you let that in, I say this too so passionately, and I'm also incarnated in the body inside of capitalism and struggle with this. It's so difficult to feel vulnerable here. That's like the ultimate gift, kind of like meaning of life, to have vulnerability, to have this relationship towards giving and needing desperately. I think about, it's funny, I asked the first question to be the meaning of life, but when I think about the really meaning of life, I think about two archetypes, the fountain and the beggar. In a very archetypal way to look at magick, the kind of, three highest archetypes that are like pure divine energies, how they come down into the lower realms of where consciousness happens is through an interplay between two archetypes, the fountain and the beggar. It's like fountain, but we are all divine, so we're all doing that thing. This is how divine energy comes into the world, by doing these things, by being a fountain for another person. But that fountain could be your own vulnerability, and that other person being a beggar. I need to feel connection. Please, someone be vulnerable with me. But we're both all doing that at the same time. I have the fountain of being able to hold you in your vulnerability. I also have the fountain of being, please, I need food. Or, please, I need you to share yourself with me. And we're all going about this incarnation with those two needs. We could share and change one another by connecting and growing, or opening empathetically to one another. And by, when you give, I receive. But it is, how is it possible to see a different of, but when you giving, are you actually receiving? You know, when I give, am I actually receiving? I pray.
Whereas I'm just noticing I can barely show up for this conversation right now. I'm like so squirmy.
That's okay.
I'm loving it. I'm loving it. And I'm like, I've been, I've been thinking a lot about vulnerability in terms of like the conflation that happens around safety, right? And I think that's what I hear you speaking to, of just that we think we're getting safe, but actually our safety is in our realness. Our safety is in our authenticity. It's in our rawness and our openness, right? Like that's actually where our safety is, but we think our safety is like in the protection of that. And I have been just, noticing that in partnership, how that capacity to be that, to be raw, authentic, real, like open-hearted, like is often there in the beginning of relationships. And as they go on, like, because like, I think the common cultural narrative around it would be that like people are becoming more distanced from each other, and so that they get less like that. But I actually think it's the opposite. I think that people are getting closer and closer and closer, and it just feels more and more terrifying to have those levels of vulnerability. And of course, you're right. Like we can't have that kind of sex, for example, that takes us beyond, that's transcendent, without those levels of vulnerability. And yet, like, even just talking about it, I'm having a somatic response, I'm like, oh, but I want it so bad.
Yeah.
And I can like, oh, like I want it and I don't want it in equal amounts, almost like there's that tension.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that if I'm feeling that, like many people feel that, right? Of like, I want it and I can't fucking stand it. Cannot bear it at the same time. And like, yeah, it's just like, yet another one of those binaries that we have to get wide enough to embrace all of, right?
Yeah, well, it involves so much change in order to be that vulnerable. It's like, it does feel like that kind of like Plutonian transformation of like literally like the whole self has to melt and the other person's whole self has to melt. And it's like ego death, essentially, to put it in this, which sounds like, those words have been talked up to feel so scary, and it does feel so scary. But also I'm terrified as well. I'm also like I feel like a child that I'm like peering so far over the edge that I might just fall in. And what if that's what it takes to just be like, oh, but what if I just look a little bit more? And then you just fall in.
Yeah.
Because like, it's funny, I brought up the date of this transit that I was mentioning earlier between Pluto and Saturn. That date, okay, I've been looking forward to this date because, you can look up when transits are within ephemeris. And so I knew ahead of time, and it's on a particular place in my birth chart. So I was like, ooh, I was looking forward to it and being like, I wonder what will happen in my own life, But that date of January 7th, which I learned post haste, was the date that COVID-19 was identified. That like contact was made of like, this is discovered as an actual thing. Like there was cases before that, but that date of January 7th is when it like, there's like, under the microscope, look, it's that thing that's causing this. And we're talking about like consequences of like vulnerability and change and our like sexual relationship. We're talking about Pluto, talking about our sexual relationship with one another, our ability to have that vulnerability, our ability to experience that like change with another person. What is this moment of what we're all going through like have to do with that? So you asked me about like in the zodiac or in these archetypes about dealing with those rapey parts of us. Something that I see and I think about all of the fucking time in this thing in the Zodiac, because it doesn't feel like this is my information. It's like, it's there, it's old. I think about Libra, right? So that's the sign that's before Scorpio. And Libra is like, making decisions. It's all about that. I've heard people talk about Libra being like, kind of like democracy, like everyone is collectively participating in a decision being made. But how we make that decision together, Libra is the sign before Scorpio, determines how our communal sexual relationship happens. So if we have a collective relationship to hearing one another speak, like if we leave anyone's voice out in how to collectively respond to rape, essentially, that's like the opposite of connection. If what life really wants is like raw vulnerability, I think that vulnerability is life's greatest achievement and her fondest memory. If that is what life is seeking, then rape is like the antithesis to that. And then connection and intimacy is like the antithesis to rape, right? But how we collectively respond to sexual assault or violence in that kind of way, like accumulates over time. But it involves like every person's voice. So democracy is like representative, or the kind of democracy we interact with is like representative democracy. So you like choose like, this person can go, and I'm betting that they will speak on my behalf, essentially. I will bet on this person over this person. But there's different ways to make decisions together. It's like collective agreement. If every person's voice is brought together and says, we will make this decision together, we're going to wait for a long time until we've seen all of the sides, every person has said everything they have to say, and there's responses, and you just take your time, and then you make a decision together. That, in the Zodiac, like, is the script of how we interact with violence, or how we interact with very particularly sexual violence. Because, after someone experiences that form of violence, it can lose, like, it like damages like memory, ability to recall memory, not just of an event, a particular event, but like the ability, it damages the actual ability to recall memories. If life is memory, then this form of violence has brought us to this point where, half of the people, most of the people in the world do not have anywhere near enough. We don't have food that is nutritious. We can throw out all the statistics of how much the rapiness is really affecting everyone. Everyone is having their ability to connect being like attacked from all sides. Ability to like give ourselves intimacy. That antithesis to like taking power over another. And then that becomes our world, our state, which way we choose, whether we choose to hear people or whether we choose to live in a world where people are silenced. But the thing that I see in this transit, like really when I was looking forward to it, I was like, because I look at all these archetypes, I was thinking like, damn, like this could go either way. This could go like something will happen that will bring about like either extreme global fascism or the end of capitalism and colonial patriarchy. Like to me, the events of this transit it's very obvious as we're sitting here today, probably both isolated in our homes and knowing that like billions of other people in the world are going through the exact same thing. This moment feels large, what is on the line is really large. The rise in fascism that's happening, even building up to this point, how easy it could be for fascism to completely take over this moment. You've seen, if you can look on the news, there are many, multitudes, myriads of signs that fascism and authoritarianism and capitalism and colonialism would love to take advantage of this moment to take. But there's also an opportunity of change. It involves that. We're talking about Pluto, letting our ice melt, be vulnerable with the other person. Which, how do we do that when we're all alone in our homes? We have to work together. Like, find some way to work together. Because there is an incredible opportunity in this moment. The thing about it, I mean, there's so many people have to sit in their homes, and capitalism is essentially barely functioning at the moment because no one is participating in, not no one, but like our participation in capitalism as a collective species has lessened considerably in the past 5 weeks. But we're still like here and functioning. And I don't know about you, but it seems like word on the street is like a lot of people being like, okay, but why did we have to go to work every day before this? What was the purpose of that? Why do we have to pay rent for these homes? Why do those people have to pay mortgages? We're all still here. Capitalism has come to a halt and a stall. It's terrifying. The change is terrifying because you never know what's on the other side. Literally, never know.
I many years ago lost a job and kind of suddenly, and had a bunch of credit card debt. Couldn't pay the credit card debt, so I just stopped. Right, I stopped, and I couldn't believe it that I kept being able to be alive. That there was about like, oh
yeah,
like I'm still here, I'm still alive. Like the world is not ending because I'm not paying credit cards. And actually, after a while, they stopped calling. And actually, after a while, like many years later, I randomly checked my credit one day and it was fine. And I was like, okay, WTF. Like, what the hell just happened? Because that's how it's supposed to go, right? And I think we're in that moment of people just being like, oh, like it's actually, my life is good, like my life is actually, there's some goodness here. At least I hope that people, are having some experience of some of the goodness. Like I know that people are also freaking out. There is an opportunity here. And I know that you are offering something special through the quarantine. And I just want to give you a chance to mention that before we finish up.
Yeah, I'm going to be talking about on the internet, probably YouTube. But so in the Zodiac, I've been looking really deep into how the visual structure of these things go together. And it's become, over time and digging deeper, very obvious to me. And well, actually, a better way to say it is unavoidable, unavoidably obvious, that inside of the Zodiac is the reincarnation cycle. It's like a actual map of how to measure time in relationship to reincarnation, essentially. Which I think that saying that could, I'm going to be making these animated videos probably coming out in the next couple days after we record this, so it'll probably be out by the time you release it. Of teaching people how to understand these the Zodiac in these larger archetypes, and working towards teaching the Zodiac as the reincarnation cycle and how to measure time in that way.
Mars, I just want to thank you so much for coming on Bespoken Bones and talking about all of this and being willing to delve into just these questions that are hard and exciting and strange and beautiful and intimate and really just happy to have the opportunity to spend this time with you and to have this conversation. And folks can reach you on your website. Any other ways that you want folks to reach out to you?
Well, I guess the website's a good way. There's I'm on YouTube and Facebook, and I have a podcast. But I guess you could just go to the website. There's all the directories to all the different places where I have media content, where I animations of sorts and audio.
Great. Again, that website.
Thank you so much, by the way.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's super great to have you. And I just want to give folks your website again, which is marzgradiva.com, MarzHausgradiva.com. It will also be in the show notes. And go ahead and check out Marz's work there.
Thank you.
So I want to thank everyone for listening to this episode of Bespoken Bones. It's good to be with you in this time, and I hope that these conversations are feeling supportive. And we have a new YouTube channel with all of the podcasts, so you can like and subscribe to that. You can also support us on Patreon, and it gives you a chance to suggest guests and ask questions of guests, so feel free to support us on there. And I'm Pavini Moray. This is Bespoken Bones, and we will be back every full and new moon with more embodied goodness and ancestral wisdom.